Hey, Martin Matt here. Und dies ist Killer und welcome with Wheels of Fury. And I just butchered that, so as you can tell, we're going to do look back at 1992 Rampage, which took place in Munich, Germany, and that was a really good show. Yeah, I think that I really miss those days where it had, well, we were just talking about it, the PG era today doesn't compare to the PG era of back then. It was more so done right, I guess.
I don't know if you really say it was done right. It just seemed to be that during the 90s, like the early part of the 90s, even though you could consider it PG, there was a lot less focus on like the kid-friendly aspect of it and more focus on like the wrestling and maybe backstage segments and stuff like that. Whereas with today's version of the PG era, yeah, you focus on the wrestling, yeah, you focus on backstage segments, interviews, promos, etc. But there's a lot more push of selling products. Like, okay, yeah, when you watched wrestling in the early to even mid and the later part of the 90s, heading towards the Attitude Era, you might see fans wearing wrestling t-shirts, the foam 2x4s, or the foam
Tombstones,
the
Hulk Hogan finger.
Yeah. And that's all great. And I noticed when they did like a Monday Night Raw or the In Your House pay-per-views, there was a little segment where they would advertise t-shirts being sold in different sizes for Shawn Michaels, Diesel, maybe Undertaker, and different prices, and maybe also jackets. But there wasn't a large focus on it. As time went on, it seemed to be the focus became a wider scale for the selling of your t-shirts, your hats, your armbands, your wrestling buddies, and then action figures, and rings, and, you know, advancement of these things, where now it's like you got a talking ring, and all this other stuff.
I think, too, with the early 90s, as opposed to now, it's like, okay, it seems like now they just talk down to you. Yeah, in a way. Like, back then it was sort of like, okay, so we're cartoonish, yeah, okay, and we don't use a lot of profanity and all that kind of stuff, but it seemed a lot more like they weren't insulting our intelligence, I guess. Because, I mean, I was about 7.5 when I started watching, and it was like, yeah, you know, it wasn't like they were talking down to me or anything. It was just straight up wrestling. I can't really describe how it was. Like, I look at today and I go, okay, if I was like 7 now and watching the product, I'd be like, this seems more like a kid's show than, you know, a professional wrestling or sports entertainment show.
And the thing that makes it rather hilarious is the fact that now it's like, okay, they're geared toward selling things to kids and, you know, getting kids to watch wrestling and that. But in the, I'd say, mid-80s, there's a show on called Hulk Hogan's Wrestling.
Oh, yeah, Rockin' Wrestling?
Yeah, the Rockin' Wrestling,
Yeah.
which was an animated wrestling show that looked like it was meant for kids. But during that point, wrestling was more like, kids might have watched wrestling in the early mid part of the 80s, but not as much as now, well, into the 90s and nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it didn't really become more adult until the mid-90s. You got, you know, Gold Dust and a lot more vulgarity, if you will.
Yeah.
And back then, it was like hell and damn were the worst words you could say, but it was still a lot of fun. But watching it today, it brought me back to that time. Like, it's always going to, you know, and that's why I love nostalgia so much.
Yeah.
It's really cool just to see these guys and what used to be.
Even now, with the WWE Network and them having Camp WWE,
Yeah.
the things they show look like it would be a animated show for kids involving wrestlers from West Kid wrestlers going to this camp.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if you actually watch it, it's not.
Oh no. I mean, you get to hear Vince McMahon say fuck, which is like, wow. You know, and that's how far it's been. Like, that's how far, and I think they're trying to make up for the fact that they're they're trying to go back to being family friendly, as they're trying to expand, you know, okay, this is going to be for that age, this will be for this age. Unfortunately, I don't know too many people my age, except for myself, and probably you, that still watch cartoons.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of adults and teenagers that would watch, like, Futurama, Simpsons, South Park, American Dad, what have you, but the minority would be focused on, like, Dora the Explorer, or The Wiggles, or
Saga the Chinese Cat.
I don't even know that show's still fucking on right.
I'm going back a few years.
Oh, I know.
I was gonna say Caillou, but I don't even know how I know that fucking show.
Yeah, really.
But yeah, so, I mean, that's how far and this has gone, and I mean, back then, it was done right. So, watching this show was pretty cool, because this was like right before SummerSlam, and they did a lot more European shows,
Yeah.
and of course this one being from Germany. So, it was really cool. I mean, unfortunately, the one that we watched didn't have sound, but...
Well, yeah, there was no commentary, but probably because at that time, the commentary was most likely in German.
Yeah.
And back then, they didn't have the resources they do now, where you could watch a DVD of a wrestler's match, or a match that didn't have commentary, and have it be commentated by, like, Michael Cole and JR, or Michael Cole and Matt Hardy, for example.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah, I have no idea who would have did commentary back then, unless you would say maybe Vince McMahon or Raymond Russo or whoever.
Yeah.
Because I believe Stan Lane came in 1993 with the Gorilla, so it's pretty cool to see, you know, Tim White as a young guy, and of course it's, well, basically it's just Tim White and Joey Morella as the referees for this show. The show started off with my man Bret the Hitman Hart and Dino Bravo for the Intercontinental title. Pretty cool just to see, well, at that time I thought Dino Bravo would still have his blonde hair, but I guess it went right back to brown. Of course, Bret Hart would be the second time Intercontinental Champion around this point.
Yeah.
It was a pretty good match, actually.
Yeah.
And kind of interesting, too, because I thought about it, and these guys wrestled a few times. The one match I remember was probably mentioned on Wrestling with Shadows, maybe.
Yeah.
Where Bret Hart hurt his sternum.
Yeah.
It was out of the ring, and Dino Bravo was stalling or doing whatever. Well, the referee counted him out because Bret just couldn't finish the match. But this match was pretty good. Of course, finished with the flying elbow. Well, Bret Hart's version of it anyway.
Yeah.
And kind of weird how back then, that's all it took to win a match.
Yeah. These finishes for wrestlers during that point in time were very simple.
Yes.
I mean, now there was matches throughout the 70s during the Worldwide Wrestling Federation era, and even go like AWA as well.
Yeah.
There was wrestlers that had very simple finishers. Like Bockwinkel had the Oriental Sleeper, and
Baron von Raschke had the claw.
well,
Kind of.
it's a simple finisher, but not to the caliber of simple as to like the easiest move in the world.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I gotcha.
So like, yeah, Nick Bockwinkel with the Oriental Sleeper. You had like Tito Santana with the flying elbow. You had Randy Savage with the elbow drop. You had
Hogan with the leg drop.
yeah.
Or, at the time, Shawn Michaels had the side suplex.
Yeah.
Or figure four leg lock. But,
Yeah, but generally when Shawn used the figure four, he wasn't really getting wins with it. It was just, either say, a heel move, if you will.
right, yeah.
Well, there's a match later on that we'll get into, and I'll elaborate more on that. But yeah, it just seemed to be wrestlers' finishers were basically like a one and done deal.
Right, yeah.
And even like as far as a build up to the finish was very little.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you look at someone like Dino Bravo, and as much as a lot of people don't like him and make fun of him or whatever, he was a pretty good wrestler. I mean, he looked like a sort of a brick shit house. And just that bear hug to Bret Hart.
Yeah.
Kind of like really, well, devastating anyways, but Bret Hart obviously had the upper hand. I didn't see the sharpshooter,
No.
so it was, probably didn't use it as much. Well, that's not true. I mean, that's how he'd be Mr. Perfect. But
Yeah, the sharpshooter was like his go-to.
Yeah. So, also you saw the pile driver.
Yeah.
Which is banned today for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
You know, but
Yeah, unless you're the Undertaker.
yeah, unless you're the Undertaker, of course. But it was still really fun to watch.
Yeah.
And of course, Bret Hart won. I'm not even sure. Oh yeah, it was for the IC title. So Bret Hart won, and it was a pretty cool match. We next go on down to Hacksaw Jim Duggan versus the Iron Sheik, or as he was called back in the early 90s, Colonel Mustafa. But you never really got. That was like right after the whole thing with Sergeant Slaughter. But this is a match where, and it's funny, they always do that. They have the Patriot guy, the American, who always challenges and faces the foreigner. And you look at Jim Duggan, and you had him, you know, with the Iron Sheik, and later on with Yokozuna, or anybody that was from another country. You know, John Cena with Jinder Mahal and Rusev. You know, it's kind of like interesting how that kind of works, but I mean, they're two really good wrestlers, and you know, kind of cool to see Iron Sheik still going at that point.
I really think probably the reason why they gave Iron Sheik a different name at that point was because they had Sergeant Slaughter with him and Adnan.
That's who that was.
Yeah.
Crazy Eyes.
Yeah.
But
The Saddam Hussein look-alike.
yes.
It was Sheik, Adnan, out KC or something like that, and then what you said.
Yeah.
So I think to avoid confusion with having two Sheiks, I think give Iron Sheik a different name and then bring in this guy as Adnan, whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
And then of course bring, no, never mind, he wasn't there at that point.
This match, you know, and I get it. Iron Sheik hates America, but do you really have to have him spit that many times? Like shit. But Hacksaw has always been one of the best wrestlers of that time. Just his presence, and yeah, he's a big goofball, but he can get it done in the ring.
Yeah.
And seeing how the tackle that won him this match was pretty cool. Well, it's a tackle or shoulder break. But yeah, you know, and it's a shame too, one of the guys that never held a WWE championship or any championship at that federation, you know, going to WCW and getting a title or a title in NWA or wherever he was before that was pretty cool. I know it's kind of unfortunate because again, he is one of those guys who represented the United States of America, so kind of funny how that didn't really go to his favor as, you know, being an Intercontinental Champion or whatever.
Duggan was one of those guys that even though he had a fairly good run in the WWF at that point, and had several matches and was loved by the fans, he never really got a high card push. He just seemed to be a low card guy.
Right, yeah. A mid-card. Yeah, you're right. I mean, unfortunately, that's just true. I mean, I would have liked to see him in the title, but that's another one of those guys that really didn't need it at that point. But, you know, he wrestles in a lot of different, like, fairs and stuff now, and appears in WWE every once in a while. It's just kind of like, you know, like the guy that could have been but never was.
Yeah.
So, speaking of Iron Sheik, we go to this match, Sergeant Slaughter versus Repo Man. That was, you know, pretty cool to see how many holds were reversed in this match. You had Repo Man do the sleeper hold, which turned into the Cobra Clutch. You know, again, Repo Man, another guy that should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. I mean, could he be in the Hall of Fame? Yes. Should he be in the Hall of Fame? Yes. Well, he depends.
Because, I mean, this guy definitely, when, you know, former tag team champion as Smash, yeah, and Demolition, and then going on to be Repo Man, and then jumping into WCW, which I can't remember, which, like I said, I don't, you know more than I do.
Yeah.
In that department, so, yeah, a guy definitely that needs to be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So, no, this match was really good, and you think about, this guy was a really good heel. I remember watching his feud with Davey Boy Smith, and, like, getting really pissed off when they beat him, you know, because they had a really good feud, and the vignettes were awesome, and this match was really cool, because you got to see, again, a lot of holds reversed, but Repo Man really taking it to Slaughter.
Yeah.
Now, the match really ended when the referee turned his back and Repo Man hit Slaughter with the hook and hooked his leg for the pin, but, you know, he stole the win, what can I say?
Yeah.
So,
That was another one of those things where he had the simplest thing in the world, and there's your finish.
yeah, I know, and that's kind of, you know, nowadays it really takes a lot to win a match. Like, I mean, we just talked about it, a simple move will win you a match back then. But nowadays it seems to be a lot more, like a simple suplex, you know, back then would be a good finisher. Well,
Yeah.
nowadays, it's just a part of their move set. So, it's pretty cool. But, yeah, Sergeant Slaughter, can't take anything away from him either. Former WWF champion, but unfortunately, after that, it was like, well, leave to go do G.I. Joe and come back and not really have much.
Yeah.
Of course, he did come back as commissioner, but that's about it.
Yeah. It seemed to be when he was the commissioner, all he was really used for was a comedic whooping boy.
Yeah, for DX. Sergeant Slobber. So we go on to a six-man tag match. The British Bulldog and Legion of Doom took on the Monty Shabu Show and the Nasty Boys. And it was pretty cool because you see the heel team was basically managed by the Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart. Then you have Legion of Doom, who at that time didn't have Paul Ellering until, I believe, SummerSlam. Or they must have left, and then something like that. But, and then British Bulldog, of course, and there's a guy who would go on to SummerSlam and become the Intercontinental Champion, but this was a pretty cool match. I mean, the Mountie was goading the Bulldog before he left the ring in the beginning of the match.
Yeah.
Again, trying to think back to this match, because a lot happened, but, you know, it's pretty cool to see the Nasty Boys as well. And I know we talked about them being in the Hall of Fame eventually. But, yeah, this was a good match.
Yeah, that was one of those things where you have a lot of non-tagging going on and people coming in. And so you got people like Hawk with...
Well, isn't this fucking sad? You know, we just did like... and I plugged my camera in all night. But... anyways. So, the 6-man tag team match. It was pretty awesome to see the Mountie hold up the Nasty Boy's hand to try to get them cheered.
Yeah.
But that didn't work. Obviously, the Bulldog did the same thing with the Legion of Doom. But how awesome was this match? I mean, I know I mentioned that Jacques Rougeau is probably one of the most underrated wrestlers. Kinda, sort of, like, I miss that guy, you know. And I know that his brother is doing commentary for the French announce table. Yeah. But this was a pretty cool match, obviously, and like I said, I think maybe Jacques should come back and manage Sammy and Kevin. Unfortunately, Sammy and Kevin are doing their own thing right now, but, you know, Jacques comes back and becomes a heel manager. All they have to do is, like, speak French all the time. But, yeah. We then go on to the match that was pretty cool. To see Charles Wright always be the Godfather is cool, but this guy, Papa Shango.
Certainly it is a character.
Yeah, Papa Shango versus Tito Santana, the El Matador. And, you know, back when they had the Colognes do Los Matadores, I thought, oh, this would be cool to see Tito as their manager, but for some reason that wasn't really in the plans. It made a lot more sense. But even Papa Shango, I think it's one of the most underrated characters of Charles. And I wish that he would come back as Papa Shango for an appearance. You know, back when the Boogeyman came out, I thought, let's see those two face each other. But that obviously didn't really happen, so who knows what's gonna happen in the future. I mean, obviously he's just another pushed aside character.
The thing about Papa Shango is certainly one of the more remembered superstars, but one of the least talked about as far as what he did in the ring, who he worked with. Although I think because it was, I'd say, such a short run, even though he had wrestling matches, he really got nothing to go with, especially when he got a guy that eventually became so well over and sought after, yet one of the portrayals of a character by a certain person is practically forgotten about.
Yeah.
And it's pretty sad when you talk about a wrestler of any kind and you can only really remember one rivalry they were in distinctly.
Yeah. Obviously, that one being Papa Shango versus Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah.
And the first ever feud that I remember was, promo, I guess, was Berserker Papa Shango versus Undertaker and Ultimate Warrior. And you look at that and you go, holy shit, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wrestling, but it's sports entertainment, if you want to call it that, done right.
Yeah.
In a way that, yeah, they're wrestlers, but they're these characters that come to life. And Papa Shango being the voodoo priestess or whatever, the voodoo guy, and the face paint and the tattoos, and, you know, just being that guy that can put a curse on you, and it's pretty cool. And it's a shame we don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
But again, another wrestler who is awesome. And then of course you get Tito Santana, who's now a teacher, unless he retired, who knows. You know, former Intercontinental Champion, former Tag Team Champion with Martel. So another guy who definitely, well, he's in the Hall of Fame now, but definitely I wish would make it an appearance. And, you know, looking back, when you had Heath Slater face all these legends, Tito Santana not being one of them, that would have been interesting. So, then we go on to this match. And, you know, I heard somebody say a long time ago that it's a shame that the Macho Man and Shawn Michaels never had a proper feud. Although I tend to disagree. I mean, probably they didn't have a long feud, but they had a few matches together, including this one. You had Shawn Michaels and Randy Savage for what I'm assuming for the WWE Championship. And, well, Randy Savage being the guy who got me into watching WWF, and obviously my hatred even back then for Shawn Michaels, although I was a kid, so I hated his guts. And this was a really good match. I mean, Savage is not the strongest guy. He always seems to be accident prone. I mean, he hurt his leg in the match, and he had Michaels and even Sherry try to take him out. And you look at Sherry try to hurt his leg when a referee has his back turned. And, you know, there was a point where Shawn was gonna clothesline Randy or whatever, and Randy ducks and Shawn accidentally gets Sherry. And that bump that she took, she was one tough chick. But this was a good match.
Yeah. Even if you take into consideration the fact that Shawn a few times put Randy in the figure four, and to try and get the win by figure four, he would lock hands with Sherry, and she would kind of pull on Shawn's hands and stretch out the body, so it would put more pressure on Randy's legs. Now, generally, when Shawn had matches, he may have used a figure four, but generally didn't end up winning matches with that move. But it just goes to show you what kind of mentality Shawn had at that point to really utilize Sherry and be that heel.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that being said about Randy getting his leg hurt, and it was like he could still do the elbow drop off the top rope and able to win this match. I think months down the road, he lost the title to Ric Flair due to the interference of Razor Ramon. And it was like, well, I was pissed off at that time too, because Randy was my guy. But just the fact that it took that to have him lose the title. He could have easily lost this to Shawn. In fact, Shawn's been in many matches. I'm surprised that he wasn't a WWE champion back then, but at the same time, he was still getting over as the Intercontinental Champion. Again, late 92, but this was a pretty even match. And the two smallest guys at the time, you know, Randy Savage, you know, you talk about, you know, midgets getting the WWE title. Randy Savage wasn't the biggest guy in the ring. No. So I was like, yeah, it was pretty cool to see that. One thing I won't bring up is watching Bruce Pritchard podcast on the WWE Network, and they were talking about a Hogan Macho Man feud. And WrestleMania 5, it was Macho Man coming into the ring with a smaller title. And then when the match was over, somehow they switched it to a bigger WWF title. Now, I didn't notice, obviously, but it goes to show you, like, the size difference. Macho Man's title had the Velcro, or Hogan's title had the buttons in the back. Right. It goes to show you the size difference between Hogan and Savage. Definitely one of the first smallest guy at the time to win the WWF title. Yeah. So then we go on to the Battle Royal. It's clearly we have all the wrestlers that wrestled in this show. We have the British Bulldog, the Nasty Boys, the Mountie, Randy Savage, who actually isn't in this match. No. So, Shawn Michaels, Sergeant Slaughter, Jerry Saggs, you have, yeah, all those guys. And this was pretty cool. It was almost like, too, tornado tag, you know, heels versus faces, basically. You didn't see too many heels turn on each other. You didn't see too many faces turn on each other in this match. But this was pretty cool. I mean, you had, you know, Legion of Doom, who eliminated Shawn Michaels. You know, Jim Duggan, who eliminated Dino Bravo, and so on and so forth. It was like, it was really cool to see that. And then the match ended up having the British Bulldog win the match, go over. Now, I don't know if this had anything to do with the Intercontinental Championship, because obviously a few months later it would be Bulldog versus Bret Hart at SummerSlam in England. But they interviewed Bret Hart after the match. We obviously couldn't hear it because the sound was off. So they were probably speaking German anyway. Well, not the wrestlers. But this was a good battle royal. What do you think? Yeah. So before we end, well, I talked about this briefly on Wednesday. Apparently, he passed away on Monday. And I didn't really know that, but that's one Leon White, Big Van Vader. And, I mean, just one of the biggest men in the early 90s that could move like a luchador. You talk about Undertaker and Big Van Vader, Bam Bam Bigelow. You know, this guy could outweigh both of those guys. And you have him feud with, Yokozuna, you know. I think did he go with Rod Simmons or for the WCW title?
Yes.
So he was WCW champion. You know, it's a shame that he didn't get a title at WWF, unfortunately. But again, another one of Cornette's guys that are no longer with us, because, you know, it was him, Bulldog, and Owen Hart, and WWF. Well, it's kind of a really sad situation. Obviously, he was a teddy bear outside of the ring. So, you have him guest star on Boy Meets World, which was interesting. They had called him a different name, but he was still Vader. You know, that was kind of crazy. But, so, rest in peace, Big Van Vader. You know, you'll be missed. And, yeah, this was a pretty good review. And I tried to find other VHS copies of WWF events, and this one definitely they had on YouTube. So, I mean, they didn't have the sound, but they definitely had really good matches on there. But I think we need to do more of those. This was cool. And so for Killer Kyle, I mean Matt,